Good morning, church. Standing here reminds me of the church that I grew up in Bangalore. Looking out at all of you, listening to the beautiful message and song. Thank you so much for allowing me to share a little of my testimony and my search and what I have discovered. When I got baptized at the age of 9, I was under the impression that I had become holy. And I really didn't know what to do with my holiness. My friends and I decided that we'd better pray hard for Jesus to come soon because we didn't know how long we could be that holy. It was hard, because we just wanted to be kids. It was really hard to think about Jesus all the time. We wanted to play. We wanted to giggle. We wanted to pull pranks. We wanted to tell secrets that was not inclusive of others. Finally, at the age of 11, we all decided that anyway, we could ask for forgiveness. So let's just go ahead, and we stopped trying to be holy. We just confessed our sins every day. That's enough, right? When I was 14 years old, I was asked by my classmates, one was a Hindu, one was a Muslim, and another was a Catholic friend, after we had taken our exams for, what do we call it, principles of life. And what we had to learn was actually go through most of the book of the Desire of Ages. And we took this exam, and especially for those of us who were Seventh-day Adventists and intended to be sponsored by our church for higher education, the results of this exam was considered. For everyone else, it was just a requirement to finish their Form 5 level education. They asked me, why did I think that my church was the right church? Because, Catholicism has existed way longer than us, and so has, for that matter, Islam and Hinduism. I took this question home, and I was told by my folks that I needed to figure that out myself. Of course, my folks gave me a lot of help. And once again, it was a decision about how to keep the commandments, especially the fourth one. I'm very grateful to God that I had a very blessed life as I searched for an answer to that question among many others. And of course, that is a testimony for another day. Today, I stand here and ask you these questions. Do we really need to keep the 10 Commandments? Does commandment keeping get us to heaven? Actually, how can we keep the 10 Commandments? Or maybe, why did God give these commandments? Well, let's look at that question. In order to understand that, let us consider a few points. We are supposed to have heard that in Exodus 20, verse 2, God spoke to the children of Israel. He said, I am the Lord God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. That was the beginning of what he said. So actually, God gave the 10 Commandments for the personal well-being of these people who had been slaves for 400 years or a little less. Remember, they were not educated. They were just trying to survive with all of the problems that they had meeting their taskmasters' demands and, being looked down upon by the people. Secondly, the 10 Commandments were given to serve as a foundation for this nation of Israel. So here God redeems them out of the land of Egypt. And I understand that there are 3 regulations or 3 expectations that you need to have in order to be a nation. One is that you are to be a common people. They all were from the same origins. They were to have a common land, and that was the land that God had promised Abraham, and he took them there. He was taking them there, rather. And then, of course, they needed to have a common law or constitution. So God gave the 10 Commandments to serve as a foundation for the nation of Israel. He was giving them these rules to govern their lives. When he said in Exodus 15 verse 26, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes and pay attention to his commands and keep the 10 Commandments, he actually said, and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians. So somehow we all got fixated on just the 10 Commandments, right? The 10 Commandments is just the beginning of so many laws. These laws were about their personal well-being. It was about the foundation of a country, and finally it was about laws to remind the people of their own sinfulness. When we became Christian, it did not mean that we did not have any laws before. We did. But now we have the opportunity to better understand the laws that God has given everyone. Because if we, in our own search, have studied it, we would have discovered that whether in the Old Testament or the New Testament, keeping the law did not save people. The law was given, which began in Exodus chapter 20, for these 3 reasons. Did God believe that they would be able to keep these laws? Difficult question. But that is why he instituted the sanctuary services as a means to help them understand the plan of salvation, as a means of receiving forgiveness, because we all feel a need to receive forgiveness after we have identified that we have committed a sin. So God always meets us where we are at. The law of God serves to detect sin and discover the defects in the moral character. In 1 John 3 verse 4 and Romans 3:20, we read that sin is the transgression of the law, and by the law is knowledge of sin. In Galatians chapter 3 verse 24, Paul says the law is like a tutor. Who is a tutor? I know in the college we have tutors and clinical instructors, right? And we try to differentiate between what they are. But in Paul's time, the tutor was a slave, an attendant who led the children to school. The law was to remind us of God's character and how much we needed Jesus. It is to show us why we need to imitate the life of Jesus. You know, when Jesus came, what did he say? He said, he magnified the law, and he said that it is only in 2 parts. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. That means that every behavior, every act, thought, or decision that we make could be judged as demonstrating love for God or love for man. So what should our motives be? What prompts our motives for our actions or thoughts? How would you determine what is right and wrong? Last year I was in Pacific Union College, and just a few months before I left, I attended a seminar, and something that I heard over there clicked in my mind and made me realize, oh wow, this is true. This is how God wanted us to develop. You know, God is gracious and merciful. He knows that in our minds, because of sin, we are not where He wanted us to be. And we have taken sometimes our scriptures and only looked at it at face value. So today I want to talk a little bit about how we determine what is right and wrong. Who do you look to in order to decide what is right or wrong? Are we looking to some authority, somebody above us? Whether it is, our parents, our church leaders? Do we look for a consensus among peers? Or do we decide that something is right or wrong because of a feeling in the gut? Or just that through all of our experiences, we realize if this is what happens, this is the consequence. If you choose this, this is the consequence. Or do we have some other standard? I want us to remember that we need to make moral decisions so that we shall all come together to that oneness in our faith and in our knowledge of the Son of God, so that we can become mature people, reaching to the very height of Christ's full stature. Then we shall no longer be children carried by the waves and blown about by every shifting wind of the teaching of deceitful people who lead others into error by the tricks that they invent. This is found in Ephesians. So before we look at those ways the standards or the steps that we have for moral decision making, I'd like us to look at Eric Wright. Okay? We all know currently that stroke does not need to kill everyone that it affects, because treatment that is given within a particular period of time can save the individual, and most of the effects of strokes can be reversed. So the story is about Eric Wright, who was an EMT at Erlanger Hospital, the regional stroke center in the southeastern part of the United States, and lived only about 6 miles away from the hospital. His wife was a nurse who worked there. They were at home one evening in June of 2010 when he noticed that his wife, Aileen, seemed to be suffering a stroke. You know, all of the signs and symptoms that we talk about, that we try and teach people to look for, the drooping, and then he asked her whether there was any numbness in the side, and she said, yeah, her arm was numb. And he knew that permanent damage would occur if they didn't do something quickly about it. So, first decision. Should he drive his wife to the hospital rather than waste time waiting for the ambulance to come? He loved his wife, so he said, okay, I will drive her. And so they started off. It was late at night, and raced into the car. Raced with the car. The posted speed limit was 35 miles per hour. Was he going to follow the law? Next decision. Or was he going to make sure that his wife is looked after? So he decided he was going to do what is needed to look after his wife. And so he drove. And then suddenly he saw the flashing red and blue lights and the siren of a police car. And the law is that if you see the lights or hear the siren, you're supposed to move to the side. And he realized that the car was coming behind him. Now another decision. Should he stop or should he continue? And he knew that he needed to get his wife in time to get the treatment. So he continued. And he raced into the emergency area parking lot, and he jumped out of his door, ran to the other side to pick his wife. By the time the police car stopped and the policeman came out, and he told him, stop. Next decision. Was he going to obey the law, or was he going to provide for the need of his wife? He decided that his wife was more important than the law. And he tried to brush past the officer. And you know, if you do that to any policeman, that's also another law that you're breaking. He managed to get into the ER, and he was able to get the help that he needed for his wife. And of course, Eric got arrested for breaking so many laws. So our decision, whether he was right or wrong, is based on the level of maturity that we are for making that decision. So let's look at these levels of decision making. The first one among these is the most primitive, and then we will look at the most mature way of making decisions. Reward and punishment, that's the first level. It's about if you do that which is right, you're going to get rewarded, and if you do something that is wrong, you're going to get punished, and so you decide that you're going to do the right and not do the wrong. So the Nazi soldiers, they put people into the gas chambers and killed so many of them, and grab people from their homes for no wrongdoing, but they had to do it because if they didn't do it, they'd be court-martialed and punished. What about the slaves in Egypt, Israel? They had to make those bricks. They had to do the things that their slave masters were telling them to do, otherwise they would get punished. Rulers at this level 1, they established their right to rule by powerful displays of might and vengeance on enemies. If these rulers showed mercy or failed to punish, they were viewed as weak. And level 1 thinkers would think that if those who did the wrong thing were not punished, it would be immoral. People at this level see a God of mercy who does not punish as a marshmallow God. They insist that God must use his power and his might to torment to death those who do not keep the law. Level 1 is actually very primitive. It does not require much thinking. Animals, plants, and even bacteria avoid painful stimuli and grow towards rewarding stimuli. This level of functioning is not worthy of human beings. But God meets people where they are. In Egypt, when God came and demonstrated, just like those people thought, the power of a person who has authority, he had all of those plagues come down. But every one of those 10 plagues was directed at one of the gods of Egypt. And finally, God says, I did this to show to you that I am powerful. It was acceptable for the children of Israel at that time. Next, we have the marketplace exchange. Here's Israel moving from their time as slaves, just avoiding wrong to avoid punishment. Marketplace exchange is if you do something or if you give something of value, then I will give this to you. So it's about you do something good and I will do something good. If you do something bad, I'll do something bad. God promises them that he was going to bless them if they followed what he asked them to do. And so they all said, all that the Lord said, we will do. In marketplace exchange, vengeance is a moral duty. If you do not pay someone back with the equal amount of pain and suffering, it is considered immoral. Marketplace exchange, you have people doing tit for tat. And even currently we have that kind of happenings around the world. In some countries, if somebody drops a bomb, another person has to drop a bigger bomb. Level 2 barely requires a brain. Thinking is minimal. Animals, including dogs, monkeys, and dolphins, they do things in exchange for a treat. We have trained dogs, right? Motives remain self-focused, and it is certainly not worthy of human beings who were created in the image of God. But God is gracious. He allowed us to be at that stage. The third level is social conformity. Everyone is doing it, so it's okay. Right is determined by consensus of one's peers or community. Individual vengeance is not allowed, but group punishment is considered mandatory. Ancient Israel, they wanted kings, and at the wrong time when they demanded for a king, they were punished. Level 3 does not actually require individual thinking. You just do what everybody does. In gangs and groups, you come across that. We don't really need to think for ourselves. And a lot of the countries today are trying to follow that by just having law and order. Even if people are not going to think or not mature, they just follow the laws and you are fine. And of course, those who have the laws and order, they say, we have laws. And you remember in Jesus' time, they were very upset with Jesus when he was breaking the laws left, right, and center. They said, Jesus, we have a law and you're breaking it. So right and wrong, when it is determined by law, you have a codified system. Judgment is depended on by an elected or otherwise authoritative figures, and authoritative figures are rarely questioned. What do we say? He's the judge, he's the president, he's the pope, he's the pastor. What he says is right. And our spiritual security at this level of thinking comes from holding on to that. I am following the law. God, you can't tag me if I'm on the base. I turned off the TV before sunset, even if it's just 1 minute before. Or we have the legal loopholes. I'm saved because Jesus came and lived and he kept the law, and so I don't have to keep the law. Some people think that way. Next, we come to the fifth level of decision making, which is about love for others. And right is determined by doing what is right for something else, even if the law says something else. That's where we can see Eric. He decided to carry his wife, even though the law said, he decided to break the laws, even though the law said you cannot go above 35 miles. You have to stop for the policeman. Jesus also broke the laws according to the Jews, but he broke those laws because he loved people. He wasn't looking at himself. And we have David in the temple. He takes the showbread and gives it to his people because he loves them. Level 5 is other-centered. This is the first level which makes the decision-making about others rather than the self. And we actually do not need a very high cognitive intelligence, but we require emotional intelligence. And actually we know of people who may not be with a high IQ, but they have emotional intelligence and they can be very, very unselfish in their decisions. It is about right motive, not right answers. It doesn't mean we have to know the Bible. It doesn't even mean that we have to know the doctrines of the church. But we will make our decisions because it is right for others. We have moved now to the second part of the 10 Commandments. Because we love God, now we are showing love for fellow men. Level 5, you all as parents, you take your children to have their vaccination. You hold the child down and allow a stranger to poke the child, and the child wonders, why are you allowing somebody to hurt me? You're the one who's supposed to love me. But then you know that the child needs the vaccination in order to prevent diseases. Parents may hug and cuddle your children, and at other times you may punish the child. You do it in the best interest of your child. Your attitude and intention don't change, but your actions may change. The next level is level 6, which requires thinking. It's principle-based. It's not only about a concern for others, but a realization of how God constructed life to operate. And I think I want us to consider 2 laws. One is the law of gravity and the other is the law of love. The law of gravity, it doesn't, work only if you think so. It's going to hold good. If you step off the top of a 10-floor building saying that I don't believe in gravity, you're going to get hurt. Unfortunately, when we look at the law of God, we think that we can, don't keep the 4th commandment, you can break this commandment and there's no consequence. But there is. Similarly, the law of love. Mrs. White has given this very beautiful statement about how it is only the selfish heart of man which works for himself. The plants, they give out oxygen. The rain comes down, it gets absorbed and then goes back and comes back down and showers of blessing upon us. But we can break this law if we want. I don't want to allow my carbon dioxide to benefit the plants, put a plastic bag over my head. But what's the consequence? So that is something that we need to consider when we're looking at the level 6 of decision making. Mature individuals don't use illegal drugs, not because they are illegal, because they violate the laws of health. God has given us laws of health. It's not only about drugs. What are we putting into our body? So many other things. What are we doing with our bodies? Are we following the laws of health? I can keep the 10 commandments, but I can break the laws of health and expect that God should, be forgiving. So we get very confused when a vegetarian gets cancer. See, the difference between God's laws and human laws is that a law can be passed to make marijuana legal, but a law cannot be passed to make it healthy. Right? The same way, all of the things that we do about our health choices, laws can be passed to say that this is necessary, that is not necessary, but our choosing what we put into our body is not based on those laws. Finally, we come to level 7, understanding friend of God. At this level, we not only love God and others, but we understand God's design for life. We realize that all the laws that God has given for us are for our benefit. There is a design. We don't have to think about them. We just need to do something else. We need to look at Jesus, have a relationship with Him, and do the things that we do in order to please Him, just like we would do that for the persons that we love. In John 15:15, He says, I am no longer calling you servants, because servants don't understand what their master is thinking and planning. No, I have named you friends, because I have let you in on everything that I have heard from the Father. At level 7 understanding, we understand God's character and the law of love. We understand God's design for life. We understand the origin of evil and the nature of sin. We understand and accept that there are weapons of Satan and how we can overcome that. And we understand the original purpose for the creation of man. We are told that at the end, there's going to be a time when there's a seal of God on us, and that seal of God is not about baptism. There's the seal that seals us so that we cannot be shaken out of the truth. Those of us who can make decisions at level 7, we will be so settled into the truth intellectually and spiritually, and understand God and His purposes, that we would rather die than disobey Him or betray Him, because we don't love our lives so much that we shrink from death. Love has replaced the fear and self-centeredness that we struggle with throughout our life. We will not need to keep the laws, because the laws will be written in our hearts. Verse 33 of the Bible reading tells you that He will write His law upon our hearts. And my brothers and sisters, that is what we need to work towards. We need to re-examine our own lives to see what level of decision making we are at, and ask God to be with us so that we can make decisions at level 7. Because it's not only David who was the friend of God, or Moses who was the friend of God, or Abraham who was the friend of God that we read about in the Bible. We each need to become a friend of God. We need to look not only at the benefit that others deserve, but also we need to see how can we represent God in our lives. Because He cannot be here personally, but He has promised us that He will live in our hearts and He will live out through us.